we always pose to our guests in our final question for them to offer up to our listeners, given the immense success that you have had and continue to have in your career, to leave our listeners with 3 timeless takeaways.
Okay, well, the first is goes back to the dawn of education or self-discovery, which is know thyself, which is like, I think Aristotle said, know thyself. And the idea there is actually take a time to figure out who you are, your values, your own purpose and vision as well. Because vision is really interesting, because vision is temporary, in that you have different visions for different aspects of your life. So you might have one for a family, you might have one for I don't want a family, you may have one for my free time, you may have one for your physique and your physical attributes, etc. All those things change. So they change depending on your period of life. So the first is to really take time to know thyself. And the second is to realize that, and this links to the S curve, but I won't go into it, is that we tend to think of life as a linear arrow from left to right. So the arrow of time goes from left to right. I'm born and, a bunch of stuff happens and I die, right? And we tend to think about that in 100-year cycles. Now that's changing, firstly, because for every year that goes on in our lives, years are added on to the longevity of human beings. So that's important. But the reason I say that is we tend to think about everything in a linear perspective. But when we start to think of things as a curve jump, so as in I go up a curve, I get to a point, and you think about the shape of the letter S, and you go, well, I go up to the top of the S, and then I jump to a new one, and then I jump to a new one, and it starts to change how I think about things in my life, including I'll think more in increments of experiences. So I go to school, what did I learn there, if anything? Did I learn that I don't like school? Did I learn that I like aspects of school that weren't covered? That's feedback. So try to think of things in a more scaling manner rather than a linear manner. And because if you think that way, you stop thinking about things finite, as in a career or an experience in life, or you being a CEO. You go, well, that was just a thing I did at that period of life. Now it's time to do this other thing, which starts all over again. And it starts to go in this kind of scaling aspect rather than a linear aspect. And then the last thing is really talking back to what we talked about earlier on, is don't over-identify with a role that you're playing in life. And this even goes to a parent. It's difficult to even think about that as a parent. You kind of go, well, I'll always be a parent. You go, well, your role changes as a parent. Like certainly for me as a dad, years 0 to 3, it was like kind of going, I was the guy who messed up the bottle mix and brought the nappies out. And you're kind of, they've shown this is actually kind of who you are as dad in the early years. But then you start to change and the kids start to, my son starts looking kind of going, oh, you're big and strong. They try to learn from you. And then in their teens, they start to look to the bigger world and look away from you. So you have to be flexible. And as they say, grip loosely to those things. Grip loosely to the persona that you are in time. And that goes right back to the whole idea of know thyself, because if you know what fulfills you and what your vision is and what your purpose is and what drives you, you can ultimately find that in any aspect, as a parent, as a leader, as an entrepreneur, and that ultimately will lead to being fulfilling. And a kind of a bonus one that goes back to Kintsugi is we all make mistakes and we all fail, we all take mistakes. I was actually thinking of the word mistake. And if you think about it in a movie, it's like the clipboard is like, take 1, take 65. The mistake is, well, we didn't get that quite right. Mistake. I made a mistake. Let's do it again. And as long as that's incrementally better than the version before, you're making progress, because that ultimately is how we fail our way towards success. And that is a really important aspect in life, because we don't have regrets. We let go of things. We all have stuff that happens to us. And ultimately, it's about how we deal with them. It's not the fall, but it's about the landing.